The millionaire had no idea he was a father, until he met the boy at his wife's grave. In the building on Fifth Avenue, the windows were always spotless. David Whitman couldn't stand a blurred view. The world had to be seen clearly. The streets, the people, and his own reflection in the glass. He stood by the wall of floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at Manhattan like a command center of his empire. The noise of the city never reached the 38th floor. The air up here was different, thinner, quieter. "Mr. Whitman, should I decline the invitation from the Hamilton Foundation?" asked his assistant, peeking into the office. "Yes," he said calmly, without turning around. "Would you like a reminder for the investor meeting at 3? Cancel it. Move everything after 2. She nodded and left as quietly as she came. He looked at his watch. 12:46, the silver hands of his vintage Patek Philippe, a gift from his father, moved precisely. Every year on this day, he did the same thing. The driver, as always, was silent. They crossed the Brooklyn Bridge and drove through narrow streets that hadn't changed since his youth. David looked out the window. Snow lay in dirty lines along the sidewalks. People hurried by, faces buried in their collars. He didn't know any of them, but everything here felt painfully familiar. The cemetery appeared suddenly, around a corner, like it had grown overnight. He stepped out without an umbrella. Snowflakes landed on his coat, his hair, his gloves. He walked between the rows, easily finding the familiar spot. The grave was simple, without marble excess, just how she would have wanted it. Elena Sanders, 1975-2006, beloved, strong, free. He stood in silence. Every year he wanted to say something new, and every year he said nothing. Today he was 61. He had been 46 when she died, 34 when she disappeared. He never knew where she'd gone after leaving. Only after her death had he found the grave, by accident, through a mutual contact. And since then, every year, without answers. He bent down and laid a white rose on the snow. He was about to leave when he noticed someone nearby. A young man stood at the next grave but was looking directly at him. Light hazel eyes, a tense face, simple dark jacket, cheap boots, a bouquet in his hands. David felt something tighten in his chest. The stranger didn't look away. "Did you know her?" the young man asked, his voice hoarse from the cold, or something else. David frowned. "How do you know I'm not just a passerby?" The young man smiled faintly, without warmth. "Because I've seen you here every year. Same day. Always with one white rose." He took a step closer. "Her name was Elena Sanders. She was my mother." David didn't understand the words at first. He heard them, but couldn't process them, like tuning an old radio. Static, then suddenly, a clear signal. "What did you say?" "I said she was my mother," the man repeated calmly. "And for years I wondered who my father was. Then I started coming here, just waiting, and one day, you showed up." David stepped back like he'd been struck. He stared at the young man but saw another reality. Elena's smile, her eyes, her voice, and this face. It wasn't unfamiliar. "What's your name?" David asked. "Nathan. Nathan Sanders." David stumbled, his breath caught. He didn't respond, just turned and walked away. Nathan remained, standing by the grave. David sat in the car on the way back, but he didn't see the streets. The driver glanced at the rearview mirror, thought about saying something, but saw David's face, and stayed silent. "You have a son, and it's me." The words replayed over and over in his mind. His brain searched for a way out. A mistake, a scam, blackmail, anything but the truth. But that face didn't leave him alone. The eyes, the brow, the restrained, anxious gestures. He remembered how Elena had left. She'd just vanished. No call, no note. And he hadn't searched. He told himself her pride couldn't handle his ambition. Back then, he was just rising. The deal of the year, clients from Chicago, his first residence on Madison Avenue. He gave everything to the business. She hadn't fit, or so he told himself. That evening, he opened an old drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside were her letters, a few photos, a small note he'd never read. He held it like a relic, afraid to open it. On thin paper it said, "I'm sorry. I can't be part of your world anymore. It's not for me. Not for us. Take care of yourself. I love you, but I'm leaving." That was it. Nothing about a child. He sat down slowly, like an old man. His body was fit, maintained by money. But inside, he felt hollow. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost declined the call, but answered instead. "This is David," he said. "It's Nathan," came the voice. "I figured you wouldn't pick up. How did you get my number?" "I found it. Through people, through your company. Doesn't matter." Silence. "Do you want the truth?" Nathan asked. "I'm not sure I'm ready." "Neither was I when I found out my father was alive, rich, and had never looked for me. But now you know, and we can't undo that." David exhaled. "Where are you?" "In Brooklyn. I work here. Restaurant on 4th Avenue near Park Slope. If you want, come. If not, no hard feelings. I just needed to say it." He came 3 days later, not because he was ready, but because he couldn't think of anything else. The restaurant was small, cozy, Italian food. Behind the counter, Nathan. In an apron, sleeves rolled up. He didn't notice David right away. When he did, he froze, knife in hand. He set it down and walked into the dining area. "You came," he said simply. "I don't know why." "I know. You came because you couldn't not come. That's something." They sat by the window. The conversation was tense. David was reserved. Nathan curt. Yes, he'd grown up with his mother. No, she never told him who his father was. Once, as a teenager, he saw her with a photo, a serious-looking man in a suit. He remembered the face. Later, he found that face online. The name, David Whitman. Real estate mogul. Billionaire. "I never searched for you," Nathan said. "I thought it was pointless. But when she died, something clicked. I needed to know." "And so you waited at the grave?" "Every year, same day. I figured if you really loved her, someday you'd show up, and you did." "I want a DNA test," David said quietly. "Not because I don't believe you. I just need to know." "I get it. You're used to confirming facts. I'd do the same." "Are you angry?" "I don't know. I was. Now I'm just tired. I don't want your money. I don't need your name. I just wanted to know who you were. And maybe see if I got anything from you besides looks." When David left the restaurant, he couldn't feel his hands. The night was cold, but that wasn't the reason. The world had changed. He had a son, and that son had grown up without him. Waiting for the DNA results took 10 days. During that time, David couldn't work, rest, or sleep. He started waking at 5 a.m. and sitting in the dark. Dreams came, not nightmares, but something strangely warm, unnerving. Elena in a garden. A woman's laugh. A boy's voice. A boy with his eyes. When the results came, he wasn't surprised. He already knew. Match 98%. Paternity confirmed. He stared at the screen, then printed the document, just to hold it. He called Nathan. "You got the results?" "Yeah." "Want to talk?" "Only if you won't act like this can be fixed over a couple of dinners." "I'm not that naive." "Good. Then come over. I've got a question I can't let go." They met in a park near the restaurant. It was still cold, but the sun was hanging longer in the sky. "Why did she leave?" Nathan asked. David shook his head. "I still don't know. I tried to remember. Were there signs, fights, warnings? We lived in different worlds. I ran forward, closing deals, building my future. She just loved. Quietly. Patiently. And then, gone. No trace. I didn't look. Why? I thought she chose to leave. I was arrogant. I thought if someone couldn't keep up, they weren't worthy." Nathan stayed quiet for a long moment. "Then you were an asshole," he finally said. "I was." They sat on a bench. The wind didn't feel as sharp anymore. The next day, David decided to find someone who knew Elena after she'd left. He started with the only lead, Paul Gregson, the company's former legal advisor. Paul had retired and moved to Provo, Utah. "Yes, I remember her," Paul said over a video call. "She came to me back in 2000, looked scared, confused. She said she was pregnant, asked for advice. Why didn't she come to me? She said, 'Someone wanted you gone.' Literally. You were stepping on old players' toes, remember? There were threats. She said, 'If something happens to him and the child's left behind, I have to protect him.'" David's insides twisted. He remembered the threats, phone calls, notes, once even slashed tires. He'd shrugged them off as part of the game. She wanted you to live and wanted the child to be safe, far away from that world. He hung up and sat still for a long time, fingers pressed to his temples. Elena hadn't left because she stopped loving him. She left to save him and their child, and he'd thought she'd just given up. Nathan opened the door almost immediately when David rang. "Got something to tell me?" "She left to protect us," David said. "She was afraid someone would kill me. I didn't know. I never knew." Nathan stepped aside without a word, letting him in. The apartment was simple, tidy, a guitar in the corner, bookshelves, a framed photo of Elena. "I grew up here," Nathan said. "She died here, quietly, fast, cancer. Why didn't you come to me?" "Too late. She never told me your name. I started piecing it together only after she was gone." David looked at the photo. Elena's eyes looked tired, but still the same. "I failed both of you." "Yeah, but you're here. Now. That's not nothing." They sat in silence. No small talk. No performance. "I don't expect miracles," Nathan said. "I don't want yachts, trips, or your name. I just want to know who you are. And I want you to try to know me, not all at once, but a little." "I will," David said. And for the first time in years, the fear began to fade. Not fear of dying or failing, but the fear of being someone's father. Because he already was one. He just had to learn how to live like it. Nearly 2 weeks passed since that last conversation. Nathan didn't call, didn't write, just waited. And David, to his own surprise, didn't force it. Instead, he started showing up at the restaurant. Quietly. No warning, no pressure. He'd sit at the same table by the window, order coffee and pasta, and watch his son work. He didn't ask for anything. On the third day, Nathan approached him. "You're persistent. I know how to wait. In business? Now, not just there." He sat across from him, took off his apron, wiped his hands. "I thought you'd give up." "I used to. I gave up on her. I don't want to give up on you." Nathan nodded. He still wasn't sure if he believed him, but he was willing to listen. "I wasn't there. For your childhood, your teenage years. I don't know how you grew up, what you dreamed of, what pisses you off, what matters to you. I know almost nothing about you, Nathan, but I want to change that. I don't know who you are either, besides the headlines in Forbes, but I once saw an interview. You talked about living in a garage in the 90s, eating canned beans. I thought, maybe he wasn't always made of glass." "I wasn't," David smirked, "but I learned to be." "Why?" "It made survival easier. Easier not to feel. And now? Now, it's harder. But for the first time in a long time, I feel alive." In the following days, they met more often, still on neutral ground. The restaurant, a coffee shop, sometimes a walk. They talked about simple things. Food, books, movies, carefully, about Elena. Nathan told him about her habits, how she cooked on Sundays, even after working late, how she played vinyl records, how she once quit a job because her boss yelled at a coworker, how she dreamed of Italy but never went. "She did everything for me. Literally everything." "I should have been there," David said quietly. "You're here now." One night, Nathan invited him to close the restaurant shift. David came, helped take out the trash, joked with the cooks. He felt strange. Like for the first time, he wasn't living in a glass tower, but among real people. No tie, no mask. Afterward, they sat in the kitchen. One on a crate, the other on an upside-down bucket. "Did you ever want to be a father?" Nathan asked. "I never thought about it. I was always running from something. Maybe from responsibility, maybe fear. And now? Now. Yes. Now I want to try, but I'm afraid I'll mess it up. Welcome to real life." They sat in the quiet. Only their voices filled the kitchen. "You know what hurt most as a kid?" Nathan asked. "What?" "Not knowing who I was. People would ask, 'Where's your dad?' I lied, made things up. Sometimes said he died. Sometimes said he lived in California. But I never told the truth, because I didn't know it. I'm sorry. I get angry. Still do. But I don't want to be a person who holds on to that forever. I want to move forward." "So do I," David said. "If you'll let me." That night, he invited Nathan to his home. Not his office. Home. The penthouse was luxurious, but empty. A place people existed in, not lived. "You live here?" Nathan asked. "So technically, yes. And honestly, just starting to." They stood by the window. Manhattan sprawled beneath them, lit up. It's high up, Nathan said. It's lonely, David replied, and both knew they were starting to get close. Spring didn't come to New York all at once. First the dampness, then the rain, then the sunlight, staying just a little longer each day. 2 months had passed since the night Nathan first stepped into his father's home. A lot had changed, not in a movie-perfect way, but slowly, genuinely, through awkwardness, tension, and effort. They started seeing each other regularly. No schedules, no obligations. David sometimes dropped by the restaurant and helped in the kitchen, learned how to grill burgers, though Nathan joked he smelled like a food truck. Sometimes they saw movies, taking turns picking. Sometimes they just stayed in, ate takeout, and sat in silence. But the silence was warm now. One day, Nathan visited David's office, just to see it. "Wanted to see where you live when you're not at home," he joked. "Welcome to the loneliness fortress," David replied. He showed him the floors, the models, the reports, the pictures of buildings across different states. "You built all this?" Nathan asked. "Yes, but now I want to build something else." "What?" "A relationship, a family, a life that'll stay after I'm gone, beyond concrete." In May, Nathan made a suggestion. "May 14th. That's the day she died. I usually go to the cemetery alone, but this year, maybe you come with me?" David nodded, quietly, just looked him in the eyes and nodded. They went in the morning. The weather was strangely clear. No wind, no rain, as if the world had paused. Same grave, simple, but now, 2 men stood beside it. "Hi, Mom," Nathan said. "We came together today." He placed daisies, her favorite. David, a single white rose. "I didn't know you were gone," David said softly. "I didn't know we had a son. I didn't look, but I should have. I live with that every day. But I'll do everything I can now to make sure he never feels abandoned again." He didn't know if she could hear, but Nathan could, and that was enough. They didn't leave right away. They sat on a nearby bench. "You know," Nathan said, "if you'd come into my life 10 years ago, I probably would have hated you. Everything was too raw, too painful. And now? Now. I'm glad you came when you did, when I was ready to hear you. Thank you for not pushing me away. I didn't forgive you overnight, but now, I forgive you. No drama, no music, just truth. Forgiveness, acceptance, a chance." A few weeks later, they went to Italy. Nathan's idea, the trip his mom never took. "You want to see Tuscany?" he asked his father. "She always dreamed of it. I think we should go. For her. Together." They rented a small house, not a villa, just a terrace, olive trees, vineyards. David turned off his phone for the first time in years. They walked, drank wine, talked about everything, and nothing. On the third evening, Nathan placed a photo of Elena on the table. "She's here with us," he said. "I know," David replied. When they returned to New York, David made a decision. He gave Nathan part of the company's shares. "This isn't a bribe. It's not thanks. It's not for blood. It's for trust. And because you're my son, which means this world is partly yours." Nathan didn't take the papers right away, but the next day, he signed them. "I don't want to become you," he said. "You don't have to," David replied. "Be yourself. Next time David stood at the window of his office looking at Manhattan, he didn't feel alone. He felt that somewhere in this vast, noisy city, he had a home. Not in the penthouse, but in a person who shared his blood, a person who forgave him, a person he still had time to say the most important words to.